Good evening. I'm Brian Adams, and welcome to Front Row Center. Produced on behalf of the San Jose Film Society, Front Row Center focuses on what's taking place in the film, television, and video industries throughout the Bay Area. The familiar theme music, which you heard opening tonight's program, was first heard on September 21st, 1957. On that evening, one of the most successful shows in the history of television premiered. And Perry, Della, and Paul Drake became household names. Tonight, we will learn everything you'd ever want to know about Earl Stanley Gardner's famous attorney, because our guest is Jim Davidson, president of the National Association for the Advancement of Perry Mason. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Thank you, Brian.
Well, I've got to tell you, when I first heard about this group, I was taken aback, so to speak. I've never heard of an organization like this, and actually it's unique, and I thought it was kind of neat. And I know our producer is curious about your group as well, so here we have you on to tell us a little bit about what your group is all about. Okay? It's never been done before. I mean, was that a reason, or has it just you've always been interested in Perry Mason and decided to start a club?
Yeah, I first started this when I decided to write a book on Perry Mason. And I started collecting the episodes on videotape. And I found myself sitting alone watching these things, and I thought there must be other people out there that would like to see these too. So I started this organization, and we have weekly meetings now where we watch the episodes.
So you sit around and you watch the videotape episodes or the ones that are currently running?
Right. And we also have members in other states. We've got a newsletter which has articles about Perry Mason, and that's a way that people out of state can participate in this.
Mm-hmm. Now, how long has your group existed?
Since the summer of 1985.
What kind of reaction do you get from people who first learn about the group?
Most of them are very enthusiastic. They say, oh, I'm so thrilled that there's an organization devoted to Perry Mason. I'm a very big fan, and I watch the show all the time. All my friends think I'm crazy. I'm glad there are other people that are into this too.
When the show first ran on network television, began in 1957.
Right.
You and I, and perhaps most of the people in the club, if we existed, we were very young at the time. So this, I'm assuming, is a group of people who really discovered the show in its rerun stage as opposed to first run.
Yeah, some are also devotees of the Perry Mason books, which started long before the TV series, way back in 1933.
Mm-hmm. How close does the series follow the books in terms of characters and plot lines?
Originally, the series was very closely patterned after the books. The characters were the right age, and just the whole concept was the same. But as time went on, the actors got older, and things started to change a little bit. Perry became a little more sedate, not quite as energetic, and they began to drift a little bit away from the books. But the important thing to keep in mind is that Earl Stanley Gardner, who wrote all the Perry Mason books, also owned the production company that produced Perry Mason. And he looked at every single script before it was produced, and he was very picky about scripts. Because of that, the quality of the show was maintained throughout its entire 9 years.
So he had creative control then over the story. Did he keep writing the books as the show was on television, or?
Yeah. In fact, he continued to write books even after the series ended, up until his death in 1970.
When did the show go off the air first run, and why did it? Was it still popular at the time, or was it having some ratings problems?
It ended in 1966. It was still doing fairly well on the ratings. It had slipped a little bit. In 1961, it was the number 6 rated show. It had dropped out of the top 25 by its last season, but it was still popular enough that it could have continued. But I think most of the people involved in the series were pretty tired of doing it after 9 years, and they just decided to let it end.
And Raymond Burr was very tired. He wound up in a wheelchair on his next series. I'm sorry, I had to try that one. Now, you mentioned the characters aged over time, which brings us to the new Perry Mason made-for-television movies, where they're even older, if you could compare what the plots are like, the writing, the production in general of the new Perry Mason movies versus the old show.
I don't think the new ones are as good as the old ones. Most of the people involved in producing the new series of TV movies had nothing to do with the original series. The only people that have returned are Raymond Burr and Barbara Hale. The weakest point is the plots, the scripts, and again that's largely because there's no Earl Stanley Gardner to supervise the scripts. The people that were involved in the original series got to know the Gardner concept so well that they probably could have done it on their own without Gardner, but without any of them, the show just doesn't hold up.
Now, why aren't there certainly must be still living people who worked on the show, creative people who worked on the Perry Mason series. Why weren't they brought in to work on these shows?
Arthur Marks, who was a co-producer on the series for 5.5 years and also a director, actually came up with the idea of reviving Perry Mason in the late 70s. And he went to several networks and they all turned him down. They thought it was an awful idea. They thought nobody would want to see an old Perry Mason. Fred Silverman, who had been involved in all 3 networks and has a lot of connections in television, came up with the idea a few years later and decided to bring back Perry Mason. He convinced NBC to fund it. And he did bring it back, but without any of the original people. He used his own production people. And it was a big hit in the ratings, but I think that's more of a nostalgia thing than because of solid writing.
Although, from what I've gathered, because of the ratings and doing so well, I mean, they've continued to produce, several more than just the 1 or 2 episodes. Do you think, are we likely to see a Perry Mason series return, or are they going to pretty much stick to this format? They'll
stick to this format if it continues. They've done 9 so far. The reason they won't do a weekly series is because Raymond Burr doesn't want to do that. On the original series, he worked very hard, and he worked long hours. He lived on the set. The only time he got to go home was on the weekends, and he went through 9 years of this. And he has said that of the many things that he's done in his life, the one thing that he regrets is Perry Mason, primarily because of that, because he had no life outside of the show.
Was it a matter of typecasting after that as well, or he did have a successful Ironside series?
That's true. No, I don't think he's had much problem with typecasting. Yeah. He had that more before Perry Mason than nowadays.
Right. Is he kind of semi-retired now, or...?
He does a lot of things, not just television and movies. He's an orchid grower. He's very much in demand at conventions of orchid growers. He has a sheep ranch up in Geyserville, or in Healdsburg. And he's always traveling all over the world.
Does he know about the existence of your group? Is he a member himself? Has he talked to you personally?
He's sort of an honorary member. I've never spoken to him personally, but he does know about us. We send him our newsletter every week, and he has read it.
Have you received any correspondence from him at all, saying
no correspondence. I've gotten an autographed photo from him.
Okay. How about any other members of the cast?
No. The Barbara Hale and Raymond Burr are the only ones that are still alive of the original cast. So Barbara Hale's the only other one.
Fill us in. You're the world's authority here, according to, who is the source?
Arthur Marks.
Arthur Marks, who should know.
I didn't say that. He did.
Okay. You have it on your business card, do you?
No, I don't have a business card.
Fill us in on some trivia, perhaps little bits of information that we wouldn't know. One of the things I found fascinating was that I believe in at least 3 episodes of Perry Mason, he proposed marriage to Della Street?
In the books.
In the books,
not the TV series.
Okay.
He did propose to Della. She turned him down because she felt that if she were to marry him, she would have to have babies and take care of the family and take care of his house, and he would hire a new secretary and have adventures with her. And she didn't want that.
All those 60s values, yeah.
Exactly, or even earlier. This was in the 30s when he first proposed to her.
Okay, yeah, right in the books, okay. What other bits of trivia, things we might be interested in?
One thing, probably the most well-known trivia item, is how many cases did Perry lose? This is a question in Trivial Pursuit.
Okay.
And in fact, in the TV episodes, he lost 2 cases. The first one was the case of the case of the terrified typist during the first season, and then one that was played up in 1963 was the case of the deadly verdict, where his client is convicted at the very beginning of the episode, and he has to spend the whole hour trying to find new evidence to free his client.
Now, that's surprising to me. I thought, Perry Mason, he's a great attorney. He never loses his case, but so we have a couple of episodes where that did in fact happen.
Yeah, actually, he saves his client at the end.
Of course.
But the fact is that he loses the case because the jury returns a guilty verdict. Mm-hmm. So technically, he lost those cases.
Right. And assuming they're going to make more of these episodes, we don't really know for sure, I guess.
No, we don't at this point.
It depends a lot, I guess, on the actors themselves.
It depends on 2 things. One is the ratings. The ratings have declined. They've filmed 9 episodes so far,
right,
and broadcast 7. The last few haven't done as well in the ratings as the earlier ones. Mm-hmm. NBC may decide from that they don't want to continue. Also, Raymond Burr reportedly is not enthusiastic about continuing. Mm-hmm. It may be possible that they can convince him if the ratings are good and NBC wants him.
Right. I'm just envisioning a last episode where he finally does marry Della and all's rosy, and then, of course, she's too old to have the babies now, and so she doesn't have to worry about that.
Well, the interesting thing is, in the 30s, there were 6 Perry Mason films made by Warner Brothers. In one of those, Perry and Della actually did get married.
Oh.
Earl Stanley Gardner was very upset about this. He didn't have control over these. But then in the next film, they weren't married. So there's a little bit of inconsistency there.
Now, who played Perry Mason in the movies?
In 4 of them, he was played by Warren William. And then he was played in subsequent films by Ricardo Cortez and Donald Woods.
I'm not really familiar with those. Was Burr always the first selection for Perry on television?
No, they went through a lot of actors. They considered people like Fred McMurray, William Holden, Richard Carlson, but that's an interesting story, actually. Raymond Burr was asked to audition for the part of the district attorney, Hamilton Berger, probably because of his role in A Place in the Sun, where he played a district attorney. He agreed to test for that part if he could also test for the Perry Mason part. And when Earl Stanley Gardner saw his screen test, he jumped out of his seat and said, "That's him, that's Perry Mason." And that's how he got the part.
He knew what he was looking for, but that's incredible. And Barbara Hale, any other actresses?
Most of the rest of the casting was done by Gail Patrick Jackson, who was the executive producer on the series. She had been an actress in the 30s and 40s in Hollywood. And I think she did a very good job of finding the right actors for those roles.
And one other trivia I know in the new movies, Barbara Hale's son, real-life son, William Catt, is now playing the Paul Drake's son character?
Played Paul Drake Jr.
Paul Drake Jr.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting casting, I think.
That's right.
Yeah. Are they filming in California now? Because I had heard that they were up doing most of the filming in Toronto location.
The first couple of ones were done in Canada, but since then they've done most of them in Denver. And the reason for that is that with the economics of the TV business these days, it's a lot cheaper. Right. With the unions aren't quite as strong in places like Denver and Canada as they are in Hollywood.
Right. So now your book that you have coming out soon, hopefully, will contain not just the television, but what else? Movies, books, etc.
Yeah, I'm hoping to trace the history of the character through all the media that he's appeared in. The books, movies. There was a radio series in the 40s and 50s, TV series, etc.
Okay. Well, we'll be looking for that, definitely. And we're going to put up a number, I guess. People would like further information about the National Association for the Advancement of Perry Mason. They're invited to phone Jim at 415-548-4237. And we appreciate your being here very much.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
And good luck. And we hope Perry continues. Even if the ratings aren't all that great, it's good to see him around.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
On Friday, February 5th, Peninsula Times critic William Johnson joined David and Lucille Packard for the opening of a 5-week festival of classic films at the Stanford Theater in Palo Alto. And right now we're going to join Bill for a closer look at the festival.
Right now I'm having the pleasure of talking to Miles Kruger, who is president of the Institute of the American Musical, an expert on old musical comedy theater and films in America. We're standing in front of a 1937 Cord Gray brought by the Art Deco Association of California for the occasion here. And this is, Miles, as exciting as Palo Alto ever gets. So what do you think about all this?
Well, it's my first visit, virtually my first hour ever in Palo Alto, and I'm thrilled to be here. It's an evening for classics. First of all, David Packard himself is a classicist. The theater is a classic. The films are classics. And I'm standing in front of a 1937 Cord, one of my dream classic cars.
You're hoping that this could be the start of something big as far as a revival of interest, that it could spread, that people could become more willing to go out and abandon their videos, abandon their television, and come out and see this kind of live, big screen entertainment?
I would certainly hope so, because the quality, while films are wonderfully available for the first time on video, the quality isn't very good. You see it on a small screen. You're generally interrupted by screaming children and telephones and noisy neighbors and God knows what else. And the color isn't generally very good, and sometimes if it's a CinemaScope picture, you're seeing it scanned very poorly. No, I think the way to see a motion picture is in a movie palace, and thank goodness this one is open and saved thanks to David Packard.
Talking here with Michael Crow, president of the Art Deco Society of California, and also expert on this vintage 1925 theater that houses this magnificent festival. Michael, what should we know about this theater, and why is it important that we're here tonight?
Well, it's really quite important architecturally. It was designed by the firm of Weeks and Day. They're very famous throughout the Bay Area. They designed a few other famous buildings, such as the Mark Hopkins, the Sir Francis Drake Hotel, the Brocklebank Apartments, the Huntington Hotel. So it has good company in terms of its architectural history.
This isn't a grand theater like the Paramount in Oakland, but I know there's detail and significant things to preserve here that we should be aware of. What do you like especially about the old Stanford?
I love the neon sign.
How about inside? Is there anything we should look for?
Yes, there are. There are some decorations up in the upper part of the auditorium that is probably still original, some light fixtures, and probably in what's going to happen with the theater, a lot more will be uncovered.
This is William Johnson for Channel 30 in Cupertino. We're standing here at a very auspicious evening interviewing David W. Packard, who has mounted perhaps the greatest film festival that the San Francisco Bay Area has known. Vintage films from the golden age of musical comedy, 1930s onward. And I want to ask my first question of how David is feeling this time to see a big dream come true. David?
Well, I'm nervous that the projector is going to break 5 minutes into the first film.
Can you tell me something about these wonderful projectors and the care that you have taken to show these films as they were intended to be shown?
Well, it's really just a question of going back to the old-fashioned equipment that nobody seemed to want before. Fortunately, all the equipment we needed was still in the theater, the old carbon arc projectors, the old 1924 vintage motor generator that they used to convert the AC into the DC that the carbon arcs needed. It's all there, and we just put it back together.
Can you tell me something about the quality of the films being shown? We all have seen vintage movies on video. We've all seen them on the little screen in our living room, but I know you think this is a bigger treat.
Well, most of these prints are. We were screening something this afternoon, and I got to thinking to myself, we've really got to figure out a way to get the remaining dirt off of these prints. There were little specks of dirt on a couple of these otherwise pristine prints. I'm looking now at Bob Rosen, the head of the UCLA archive, and we're going to have to figure out some computer enhancement techniques to remove the few remaining scratches from these prints. But nonetheless, it's wonderful experience to see them on a big screen in 35mm prints. And seeing a video was like seeing a postage stamp with a little picture of Florence as compared with seeing the real town. I guess that's about the best way to describe it.
I know you've been a lifetime buff of these wonderful old movies and the musicals.
No, that's not true. I haven't been a lifetime buff at all. You know better.
Well, I want to know then how you did mount this festival, and as I remember, somewhat on the strength of the Fred Astaire Film Festival that you gave after his death in July.
No, I haven't been a lifetime buff at all. In fact, for most of my life, I felt very contemptuous of films, and especially modern films. I was teaching at UCLA for 6 years. Just about the time the UCLA Film Archive got started, I didn't set foot in a theater once in those entire 6 years. I had no idea that anything like the UCLA Film Archives existed a couple of 100 yards away from my office. In fact, it wasn't until almost my 40th birthday that I watched a movie since the age of 15. And it's in the last 6 or 7 years that I've really become a serious film fanatic, I guess you'd have to say.
Am I right in that not only buying the theater, as the Packard Foundation has done, but you are also creating a separate entity of a theater foundation for the express purpose, philanthropic purpose of showing these movies?
Well, we're setting up an operating foundation to run the theater. The David and Lucille Packard Foundation is a charitable foundation that can give grants to people, but it can't operate something on its own. So it's kind of a spin-off, I guess you'd have to say. It's a new foundation. It's really part of the Packard Foundation, but it has to be independent. And we're going to operate the theater and perhaps support educational programs, perhaps some minor kind of research and writing on films. We haven't really worked it out. We've just existed as a foundation. The new foundation has existed only for 3 or 4 days. We've only owned the theater for a month now, so it's a little bit premature to know exactly what we're going to do.
And we know at this point any future festival plans after the building is brought up to code?
Well, I don't know what we're going to do. I'll tell you what I would like to do, and I hope I'm going to be able to do. I'd like to reopen with a festival of all the films of Vincent Minnelli. That's what I have as my own dream for opening the theater. Since it was his films that really turned me into a lover of old films, I'd like to repay the debt, as it were, and show all of his films.
We'd like to thank Bill Johnson for taking the time to provide that for us. On our next show, Glenn Lovell, Richard von Busak, Bill Johnson, and another guest critic, as well as myself, will be discussing the 1987 Oscar nominees. And it should be a very interesting show. We hope you join us for that. Thank you for watching tonight. I'm Brian Adams, and please join me next time, Front Row Center.